2019 was huge for me. And not only because of the self-sabotage that ruined multiple relationships with people I genuinely cared about, but because I finally got around to watching Rent. Seriously, have you seen it? If not, do stop what you're doing and watch it right now. It's phenomenal. Oh, and I read 100 books, I guess. Check. I started 2019 feeling as though I had missed out on countless books that the world had deemed classics. Authors like Hemingway, Steinbeck, Orwell had all evaded me, so I made it my goal to face them head on. Or in Hemingway's case, I guess head off. It was this line of thinking that kickstarted my reading journey in 2019, and it worked exactly how I wanted it to. I was exposed to so many books that society had talked about almost endlessly, but I had yet to experience for myself. Some personal favorites include The Grapes of Wrath, Of Mice and Men, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And those three books specifically truly embody what it means to be a classic story in my mind. They're timeless, they're enthralling, and they're written by white men. But there's a reason certain books are called classics, and when a book or a story reaches that title, it's bound to be good. Every action has an equal yet opposite reaction, and this principle applies to literature as well, which means for every good classic literature book you read, there is one that is absolutely dreadful. The MVPs of this category would be your 1984s, your Atlas Shrugged, and a little book series that should have been called The Bane of My Existence, in all honesty. The Penguin Classics Great Idea Collection. Great Ideas Collection. There's 20 books in here, and it's awful. This collection of essays and musings from famous authors throughout history are so full of wisdom that I actually feel smarter holding it. Unfortunately, with all that wisdom stuffed in these pages, there was no room for fun. So if you're trying to get through any of these works, I would recommend a coloring page or a travel board game, maybe. Goodness. Some notable entries in this collection are Why I Write by George Orwell, A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, and The Communist Manifesto by that one 10-year-old that's on YouTube. This is where my story shifts a little bit. When I started the year, my goal was to read 50 books. Unfortunately, or fortunately if you're an optimist, I guess, I finished that goal by June of the year. Doing the math in my smart brain, I decided that if I read 50 books in the first 6 months of the year, I could easily replicate that in the second 6 months of the year, which is why I upped my goal to 100 books. So this lesson is about setting realistic goals for yourself. Almost immediately after upping my goal, or doubling my goal, I started feeling the pressure. Reading stopped being enjoyable for me because it started to become a job. In the first half of the year, when I finished a book, I felt as though I was making genuine progress. I knew that once I hit 50 books, I would be done, and at the rate I was reading, I would be done relatively soon. Unfortunately, when I upped my goal to 100, I stopped feeling that dopamine every time I finished a book, and it was just more sadness. I felt as though I was falling behind with every page turned because I wasn't turning too. The best way to describe my experiences during the second half of the year would be with someone else's words. I believe it was Kenny Rogers who said, "You have to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em." Or maybe that was Kenny Loggins. Long story short, I end up leaving a lot of books until the last minute, which weighs a lot on my stress levels, until one day I have a brilliant idea. If I start to speed read, I can read faster. So begins my journey with speed reading. Now, speed reading is a legitimate skill that takes, practice to hone it and make sure it works for you, or you could just stare at every page for 30 seconds like I did. I was burning through books like Will Hunting, and I couldn't have been happier about it. I didn't retain anything I was reading, but I was getting closer to my goal, which was great. Without speed reading, I wouldn't have been able to hit my reading goal for 2019, but without my reading goal for 2019, I probably would have enjoyed what I read more. The latter half of my year was filled with books that were short or that I didn't care about. I can't tell you what happens in The Girl on the Train, nor do I think I care. Speed reading has its place, but for me, it's not an effective reading tool. It is, however, a great way to look smart at your local coffee shop. This brings me to the last week in 2019 when I still had about 10 books to read. Things were getting pretty tight. But then I remembered the greatest American art form, the short story. What other medium produces such tight narratives, deep characterization, and a word limit for Stephen King? It's perfect. So I scoured the internet looking for the best short stories ever written, and what I found was surprising. Highlights from this include The Looking Glass by Anton Chekhov, Happy Endings by Margaret Atwood, Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl, and How to Become a Writer by Laurie Moore. Short stories prove that anyone can read regardless of time commitments. Most of these things took me about 10 minutes to get through, and they were some of the best words I had seen committed to a page all year. To sum up my findings, do I recommend that you replicate my goal and read 100 books in 1 year? No, not at all. Not unless you have unlimited time and zero social obligations. I do, however, recommend that you watch Rent. Seriously, how major themes are conveyed through